Here you go. Hi there, everybody, and welcome to this week's Writers Chat. This is the place where we talk about all things writing for writers and by writers. We're really glad you're with us today, and we've got a special topic and a special guest today. So we're glad you're with us either live, and we got some of our regulars we haven't seen for a while today, so we're really glad to see them, and they're in the chat room. Or if you're joining us by the replay. So we always ask you to put comments below the replay or wherever if you see it. We try to put the replay at several different places. So we're glad, and we are here on the Writers Chat every Tuesday at 11 o'clock Eastern. And again, we're just glad to have you all here today. My name's Jean Wise. I'm one of your co-hosts, and I'm joined by my other co-host, Johnny Alexander.
Hey.
And Bethany Jatt. On that way, and we're going to turn it over fairly quickly to Bethany to introduce our special guest and our topic today. And like what we usually do is we'll join in, we'll invite the people in the chat to kind of join in towards the end to see what they have additional questions or comments that they want to make. So Bethany, why don't you introduce our very special guest, who is not a stranger for most of us here. Go ahead. Not a stranger for you either. So go for it, Bethany.
Bethany.
Lost the entire connection.
Uh-oh.
Tuesdays are cursed. Okay, so I didn't hear anything, but I'm guessing you shoved it.
I plugged it to you, yeah.
So, hi guys. I am super excited to introduce my sister Jillian Lancour, and she has been podcasting for a while now. She does so good at it. I'm super excited about today's conversation. We are going to go into some things about like why audio is the thing that we need to be doing, and then we're also going to do tips on how to start your podcast, and then also tips for how to interview. I know as authors, when your book comes out and you're releasing, interviews are a big deal. Like you need to be doing them for your book. And we're going to give tips on how to be a good guest. And then we've got several people in the chat right now who also do podcasts. So I'm very excited about when we open it up. So I'm going to go ahead and pitch it to Jill, and then we're just going to go back and forth about audio. And I'm super excited. So Jill, take it away.
Hi, guys. Well, thank you for having me back. I was here, this summer talking about Instagram, which is my baby kind of in the social media world. But podcasting is something that I've been dabbling into, and it's really fun, but I'm going to be super transparent. This was supposed to be my own podcast co-host, Jameson Ketchum, was supposed to be here to talk about podcasting, because to me, he's like, if like podcasting had levels, he's like up here and I'm like down here. So I hope you guys just very, I kind of think abstractly, so I don't even know if the methods I have are great or good, but they're what works for me, and I'm willing to share those, and definitely get Matthew in here because I know he's podcasting, he probably does a more mature way of doing it than I do. But I like what Bethany said about audio and just how social media and stuff is moving. A couple years ago, we saw live streaming was huge, but podcasting and radio has been around forever. You know, ever since technology and anything like that ever came out, it's been people listening to shows. And so it's something that, in my own little phrase, it's never going to go out of style. So if you've ever been thinking about doing something that's more than just writing, podcasting would be a great thing to start doing for your brand and your business, or for your writing career. Yeah. So I do have points, but I kind of thought it might be better if we just
go back
get into it. Yeah.
Can I share something real quick before you start? Just to pound the point about why audio is such a big deal. You guys know, like, I love Gary Vee, and he's like one of the leaders and like all the stuff with the social media and stuff. He's brilliant. Well, he talks a lot about voice, and like Alexa skills and stuff is going to be like, it's already a thing, but it's also something that we need to be jumping into. but I found a stat, and this was in 2016, so this is an old one. But even then, there was roughly 1.5 times more audio consumed than video, according to the Nielsen statistics in 2016. And that number just continues to rise. And one of the things that he says a lot is that we're in this shift that hasn't happened in a really long time, because before there was radio, it was just storytelling. And then we had radio, so everyone's just listening. And then we had this shift to video with the television. And all of a sudden, we're seeing this shift again go back the other way, where people are starting to listen. And the main reason for that he gives, and I agree with him, is because our time is so valuable. And if I'm watching you right now live, I'm watching and paying attention. If I can listen to something, I can do something else at the same time. So it's one reason why audio is like such a big deal right now, especially for society, which is why you should be doing audio as well.
I add on that the whole technology in cars right now too.
Oh, yeah.
My car doesn't have all the fancy things, but my next one I plan to get with all the fancy stuff. And you just plug it. It's just people are in cars so much. It's a perfect place for audio. And I think there's an intimacy that they get to know you as a writer and as a speaker. So it kind of breaks down those barriers much, much quicker than it is sometimes in the written word.
Well, and I think for me, I started podcasting because I've been blogging for years, but there was something, my mom says that I write like I talk, and there's something about having someone hear what you say and making a greater impact than just reading it, kind of like what we're talking about. But so that's when I was like, you know what? I really want my readers to be able to hear my voice and hear my tone, because sometimes I write things and then I'm like, laugh out loud. Like I'll write it on my blog post and I'm like, does that look stupid? Because I'm laughing, but I don't know if they're laughing. But if they can hear you laughing at yourself and laughing at the weird things you're saying and stuff, I feel like it just connects you, and it connects you to your reader and to your audience. And then I found that a lot of people were saying, this is my favorite thing you've ever done. And I'm like, hey, but love my blog. But people really like podcasting, and they like hearing you. And there's just such a difference, reading an encouraging post and then hearing the writer say it and have I've cried on podcasts, which sounds weird and it sounds so ugly when you listen to it, but thankfully you can't see what I look like. But it's just another way to get more connected and to get your point across and make it more emotional on all levels. Bethany?
Well, I'm going to jump in that Matt made a comment in the chat room about, I'm going to go up there, but it's a natural move for listeners from a podcast to audiobooks, and audiobooks are the fastest growing segment in digital publishing. And he gives us a wonderful resource there at Goodreads if you want to read that article. That's in the chat. And I think it would be. I think that goes back to that intimacy and that connection. That they connect them, and I think it's fine to cry.
Oh, me too.
Yeah,
it just does not sound pretty. I'm not a pretty crier.
Yeah, but it's vulnerable, and it becomes you become very authentic that way to the listener.
Sure. Well, and I think go ahead.
I wanted to talk about something about how to I was going to talk more about software. So go ahead.
Oh, well. I was about to just lead this whole conversation. I was just going to say, so we have I feel like when you start something, you're trying to show someone this is something that you should be doing. There's always the defense of it. This is why you should be podcasting, or this is why you should be on Instagram. And then there's all Sherlin's asking about where do you post podcasts? Now there's all this other meat that we can get into about how to even start, and is that what this title's called? Starting a podcast? So do you want to go back to whatever you were going to say?
Yeah. I wanted to go back to the crying thing for a second. I think it's okay to cry too. And when I was interviewed by Matt Bruff, I broke down. And I was going to say, as an interviewer, he was really good. We were having this conversation and he just led it to this point where he got really deep. And, I just think that just shows being very authentic and transparent. You don't be too transparent, but there's people like transparency, especially the millennial generation. There's a lot of stats about they'll pay more from brands that are transparent versus other brands and things. And Vicky says Matt makes the girls cry. I did. And I went back and listened to it just because I thought I embarrassed myself, but I don't think so. I think it just, it's real. I was going to say, Sherilyn was asking about software. And so I know we're going to get into like the how to kind of do this. And before Jill tells you like a little bit more professional, I'm going to tell you what I think is a way to do the podcast, like starting out, and then we can just get better and better from there. But one thing that I've heard a lot about is this app called Anchor, and it's Anchor. And in June of 2017, and you know how fast tech goes, so there could be something else out there that's matching it now, but Anchor became the only platform where you can publish to major podcast outlets like Apple Podcasts and Google Play Music with one touch. So that's the whole thing, is you get it with the Anchor app, and then it goes and puts it everywhere for you. And so that was why people are talking about that app, which I haven't used it yet, but that. So here's what I think, Jill. If I told people on Facebook that I might start my podcast last night because I've been wanting to do it. Here's how I was gonna do it before figuring this out. I was gonna get on Zoom and record my video and audio, so I'd have both things if I wanted to use clips. I was gonna pull the audio file and then research how to get that audio file. I was gonna probably use Anchor and just try to get it uploaded into like iTunes. But I would probably wait until I had a backlist of like 4 or 5 or more episodes before I would do that, so people can listen more than once. But that was the easy way that I was going to do that.
That's no, my methods are just as, crazy. I don't know. Jameson and I use Zoom. And actually, let me just say that the Writers Block Party podcast, which is Serious Writers' first podcast, is coming out next week. So we're really excited about that. But Jameson and I use Zoom, and we record, and we have video, and then yes, there's lots of ways to do it. When I tell you how I record my Sheila's Vintage podcast, y'all are gonna be like, oh, my Lantas, she should not be talking, because it's so simple. But I kind of am, what's easiest for me, I'm gonna do. And even if like a great software came out that was like, in 2 steps, you can record and have it on iTunes and everything, I would probably still stick to what I know because I'm comfortable in there and it works for me, even if I'm having to add a couple extra steps. I don't mind. So to just say that, so I keep seeing in comments about people saying like, starting a podcast. The thing is, I think you should start a podcast. Why not? There's lots of reasons to say you're not going to do something, but if you're in this industry and you're in this craft, why not start a podcast? I think all it can do is add to whatever you're putting out there if you have a blog or whatever you're doing. So I have a little sheet that I wrote that if you guys are taking notes, this might be helpful. So again, ask yourself the question, why do you even want a podcast? When Bethany told me, she's like, I'm going to podcast, my first question to her was, why? Not like in a sassy way, but just like, why? What is your goal there? Because, like you have your hands in so many things, why podcasting? But I think it's great. Oh, do I talk fast? Oh, this, okay. It was like,
look in the chat.
Okay. So podcasting is a huge commitment because once you like put it out there, people are going to wait for those next episodes. And so if you're just like slacking and you're like, this is just like a side project, podcasting might not be the way to go. Maybe do YouTube videos, maybe just start vlogging a little bit. But I feel like if you're going to podcast, make sure that you're saying, I'm committing to at least this many episodes, and then get those out there. And Jameson told me that before you start your podcast, you should have 3 to 7 ready, and then you launch them all at the same time, like Bethany said, so people have more to listen to. Now, I didn't follow that advice, but it's good advice. And then the next thing after you are asking yourself, like, why do I want a podcast, and understanding that it's a commitment, the next thing is, what are you going to talk about? Because this is something like you need to have a very kind of narrowed down subject or your content. You need to know what it's going to be. I struggle with that myself because She Loves Vintage is my brand, and it involves so many things. Like I just say faith and lifestyle. Well, that can mean a ton of different things. So sometimes I even struggle with like knowing what I should be podcasting about. So make sure that you really understand what the show is and what it's going to be. And then the next thing I would suggest you to do is work on your brand and make up a logo before you even start planning episodes.
Yeah.
Because to me, when you can like see your logo and you can know the name of the show that you're going to be putting out there, that's kind of when your creative juices start flowing and you can start coming up with episodes. So before you even work on content, I would say know what the show is going to be, like that umbrella where your episodes will be under it, and then go ahead and work on the brand and the logo to go with it. And then you have to ask yourself questions like, how long is this show going to be? Am I going to do seasons, like with 30 episodes, season 1, take a break? Or am I just going to go? How often are you going to publish a new podcast? Is it once a week? Is it twice a month? You got to ask yourself those questions. And then there's lots of different ways to get your podcast out there. I use SoundCloud. So I started podcasting last spring. And it was one of the ones that I just thought looked the easiest. And a lot of people, it was really popular. A lot of people were talking about SoundCloud. So that's what I signed up under. And I really like it. It was really easy for me to go from SoundCloud to iTunes, because you can't just like launch it on iTunes unless I'm totally mistaken. But you have to have it has to be supported by something. And then it goes to iTunes. So SoundCloud is what I use. But there's another one called, oh boy, when Jameson told me, I just laughed. It's like Bean Pod or the Pod Bean. I don't know. It's something weird. Blueberry, whatever that word is.
I think of Burberry, like the fashion.
Yeah, I don't know. And then you have to think about equipment and stuff. So let me tell y'all how I podcast. Oh, so see my little phone here? I go in here and I go to the voice memos. And so when I'm with Jameson, I try to be really serious and I have my mic and everything because he's serious. But when I just do Sheila's Vintage Podcast, I just record on my phone. And I think that the audio sounds really clear. I think that it sounds loud. Yeah, the voice memo is so clear. So I don't even mess with the mic. I literally, sometimes I hold my phone, but I breathe really loud and sometimes you can hear that. So I try to lower it or I keep it on the table and you just talk. But I record it on my voice memos from my phone and then I just email it to myself. I download that to the email or from the email onto my computer. And then I go into iMovies, which is on your Mac. And I add my music and I don't edit. So that's another thing that is probably oh no, because there's a lot that I laugh a lot in my podcast and sometimes it goes on too long. Or if I have a coughing fit, because I was sick, I'll just stop the recording in the middle of it and then I'll just keep going. If you listen to my last episode, I do that 3 or 4 times. I'm busting up laughing and then it's ha ha ha. And now point 3, it's very, very weird. But that's what I'm doing. I'm stopping because I just can go on and on laughing. So I don't like to edit a lot of my stuff. But that's just how I approach podcasting, because I always say to my readers or listeners that I want them to really feel like we really are just sitting together, whether it's on the couch or at a coffee shop, wherever, and we're just talking, even though it's a one-way conversation. That's how I approach it. So I try not to be too I just talk. When you're doing a podcast, I do think it's good to outline what you're going to be talking about so you can keep your thoughts in track. And when Jameson and I podcast together, that's more of our format, because when you have 2 people going at the same time, you can talk over each other, or you need to remember, who's going to say what and who's going to drive home what point. So it's good to have an outline. But when I podcast for Sheila's Vintage, I barely have anything in front of me and I just kind of talk. And that works for me, but that might not work for everybody. And actually I did my last podcast. If you listen to it, I totally butchered something, but my whole thing was about taking risks. And one of my points was take a risk to fail. So I just put it in there. I was like, look, I failed. So you just bring it back home.
You know what though? Can I add on to that?
Please. Cause I feel like I'm just going.
You are. That's great. So in the chat, Catherine said that in one of the Facebook groups that she's part of, that there's a huge discussion about the importance of editing versus just continuing with the conversation versus not editing. So I'm really excited about all the discussion we're going to have. So, but you know what? I kind of think before I hear like the points on like the verses of it, I really think it depends on your personality too. And like some things need to be cut. Like I know that I say things sometimes that should never be put out there like on record. And so like those things should probably be cut. But also I think it depends on the personality too, because I listen to Gary Vee's podcast more than anybody else's. And he very rarely will edit stuff out of certain aspects of the podcast. But I kind of like that because I feel like I'm right there in the room with them while the podcast is happening. And you get to hear the behind the scenes of other people talking to him that somebody would have cut out if they were trying to make it super professional. But I feel like he's really talking to me and I'm part of that conversation. So I like that. But it doesn't work for everybody. If it's more of a polished podcast, it wouldn't work. So I think you have to know your personality on that too and what your audience expects and wants from you.
Well, like for Writer's Block Party, I mean, Jameson and I laugh a lot during that. So I hope you guys have fun because we do. We just have so much fun. But that is more, it's not scripted at all, but we do have more of an outline and to make sure that we're giving good content, because that's more of it's not just it's not an encouraging podcast. It's an inspiration and like tips and getting you excited. So it's very different than what I do with Sheila's Vintage, because that's more me just pouring out my heart on whatever subject I'm talking about. So you're exactly right. It really depends on your personality and then what the show's about.
Is there a recommended like length of time a podcast should be? I know what I prefer as a listener, but I'm just curious if you guys, as you prepared for this, run across a length of time.
I know a lot of podcasts are really long. And when I say really long, I mean like they're 50 minutes to an hour. That's too long for me. I think, yeah, Vicky's saying too long. So when I do mine sometimes are 7 minutes. If I'm done talking about that subject, I'm done. So it's like very quick. Some are about 25, 20, maybe 30 minutes long. But I try to keep it there. And same with Writer's Block Party podcast. We're keeping them 20 to 30 minutes long because we want you to be able to listen to it while you're cooking, while you're driving. We want you to want to listen, not be like, oh, okay, I have to schedule out a whole hour to listen to this podcast. That's not going to happen. So, I mean, unless you're someone super famous, it's just not going to happen. So okay. I would say keep it slower.
I think that's a good best practice to have it be smaller, because then you can listen to multiple episodes, like if you have an hour to kill. But I think it depends on the content as well. Like Matt said, like some people who podcast their keynotes, they'll give a presentation to a room, but they'll have permission to share their podcasts with their listeners. Sometimes those are 50 minutes. I'll inhale the whole thing, but because you're listening, you can be doing other things at the same time. So you can just carry it around with you and just pause when you need to, or at the gym is when a lot of people listen to podcasts as well. It's a big thing. So, but sometimes like if I'm going through podcasts that I want to listen to, if I've got like this morning, for example, I had 20 minutes to do makeup. So I found one that was 19 minutes long because I knew when it was over, I was done. And so I kind of appreciate people who have a variety of different lengths, and that kind of goes against the whole consistency on what your audience expects. So I think it depends on the kind of show that you're doing. But if you're just giving lots of content of different things, then people can choose the time frame that they have. And if it's good content, you'll sit and listen. Yeah. I think that's the thing. If it's bad content, 5 minutes is too much. Like, in 30 seconds, if you hate the person's voice and they're annoying, you're done,
That's right. Or if they don't get into the topic right away. They have these long, you have to have some like introduction. Today we're talking about that, but you got to get into the meat fairly quickly. They start promoting this or talking about this or their reaction to this, and then they don't get to the meat. I get impatient. And a lot of times we'll turn that off and go to another one. But as a listener to many, many podcasts, I agree with what you said, Bethany. There are times that I walk over an hour in the morning. So sometimes to listen to an hour one, I'll find that, and then I don't have to worry about when it's done. I know I'm done with my walking, So
yeah,
I do like that. But there are times, there's a couple of them that are 5-minute ones, and I like those sometimes too. Yeah. So it depends on the topic and their purpose. Like Jill said, what's their why? What's their purpose? Mm-hmm.
And they're so good for long car rides too. I was just teaching at the Mountainside Marketing Conference in Asheville. It was like a 14-hour drive total for me. I listened to podcasts the whole way there, and the drive felt like nothing. And most of them were like hour-long keynotes, but I would sort of like scroll through to find the longer ones, so I wouldn't have to keep changing it and stuff. So yeah, I think if you're starting, that's probably a good best practice. Jill, what's that? Shorter.
Yeah, well, and it depends on who your audience is, because if you like a lot of you are writers, and so you tend to want to soak up that information more. But a lot of women, or like my audience, they're moms, they're wives, they're going to college. They don't have time to listen to those 50-minute podcasts, and they're not going to. Like if I even for myself, if I saw something that's 50 minutes, I would be like, oh no. Okay. But yeah, I do come back to podcasts if I can't listen to the whole thing. But it just depends on what you want to do and what you're comfortable with, and then what works. Because here's the thing, I just talked about this on my last episode, is you got to take risks, and don't be afraid to have something not work out, because failure is like a mentor. It'll tell you what you need to tweak, what you need to change, what you need to fix, and then you go forward doing something better. So
I love that. Well, Tina asked a question, and that was just kind of exactly what I was going to ask. She says, how do people find you when it comes to podcasting? And my question was, how do you know how many people are actually listening? I know how you do it on a blog, or how you do it on your Facebook, how you can get insights. Well, what do you do on a podcast, and how do people find you?
Well, are we going to get into Instagram? Because that's what I'm going to say. It's social media. So the thing, I think the best way to advertise yourself and what the awesome things you're doing is to do it on social media. And obviously most of you know that I'm going to tell you, you need to be on Instagram. So, yes. And you can look at your stats on SoundCloud. There's a whole thing that says stats, and it'll tell you, and it says how many plays you've had and what city listens to you the most and what country listens to you the most. And you can pay for more pro features that'll tell you more detailed statistics. But yes, so for advertising, how are people going to find you? I use Instagram. I put it in my story. I'll say, hey, a podcast coming out. Or the other day, I played a little 15-second clip of my episode, and I said, Monday's podcast, and you put your link in your bio. Twitter, there's a lot of people on Twitter. Podcasters use hashtags really, really well. That's actually how Jameson and I even found each other, is because I was podcasting last spring, and I was putting them on Twitter, and I would hashtag like Christian podcast or a podcast community. And he's a podcaster, and he followed me, and I followed him back just because we're both podcasters. So, yeah, so definitely you get on Instagram, get on Twitter, tell your Facebook friends. Just the more you can put it out there and keep reminding people, because you might be like, oh, I only have 10 listeners. But people forget. I forget things. I forget stuff about Bethany all the time. She's my sister. We talk every day. So you just keep reminding people in creative, fun ways. Don't nail it down their, in their head, but just remember my podcast, or, do a giveaway or something like that to get people excited. Something that Jameson and I are doing for Writers Block Party podcast, we're playing interactive games, which sounds weird, but you can play along with us. So it's fun, and we're going to be talking about that, and then we're going to want to know how many did you get right. So making it interactive and doing giveaways and stuff like that will make people want to listen. So but you got to be on Instagram.
Yes, you should totally be on. Instagram is kind of a fun way to practice talking on video, even if you're not going live on Instagram, but you're just filming yourself in those little short clips, because you have a chance to see it before you post it. I find that's a good way to just get used to looking at yourself in the camera, because that's probably the hardest thing. People tell me all the time with live streaming, it's so hard to talk to myself because I can see my face. And that's true, because you're watching your face do all the weird things that you don't know that you do.
I do love Instagram, and I'll tell you guys that I feel like without it, my stuff wouldn't be growing as much as it is. Before I start, not that this is the Instagram class or whatever, but they go hand in hand. And I say this all the time, your Instagram is your business card for whatever you're doing. So if you have a podcast, your Instagram is that calling card. You're saying this is my awesome. This is what I'm putting out there. So go listen. If you don't have that Instagram, people are going to be searching for you. And most people, normal people who are outside of our little circle don't like Twitter. And I don't get it, because I love Twitter. But they don't want to be on Twitter, but they're even just the normal moms, the normal women and guys, they're on Instagram because they show pictures of their families and stuff. And not everyone is on all these other platforms that we spend so much time on. So
yeah, Cheryl Lynn asked if we could start us back to a couple of us that are real new at this. Could you start us back on step 1? And you could walk us through how you used your phone, because I made little notes on that. But I don't think we fully addressed kind of what maybe one of you guys talked about, how you recorded on Zoom first, and then you take that. What can you talk us through? Let's see, because I know Sherilyn knows Zoom. So you get the recording, you get the audio recording from Zoom. What do you do? What's your next step?
Bethany, you know me? So here's a good tip. When you're on Zoom, and let's say you and a co-host, if you're going to do it, or by yourself, whatever you're doing, if you record, it's going to record whatever you're saying. And then if you push stop recording, it's not like you're going to see a little file show up or anything like that, okay? You have to leave the entire meeting to get your audio. So if you mess up, just keep recording. So, push stop, and then record again, or whatever you need to do, because all those audio clips are going to save into one file when you leave the meeting. So you don't need to keep leaving the meeting and starting a new one.
Okay.
So every time you push stop, record and then stop, that's its own file. Record, stop, own file. So, that was a little weird when I used Zoom for a little bit to record my Serious Writer Academy classes, and that's when I was same kind of concept as getting the audio. And then once you have those, if you want to add music, the easiest way that I have found to do it is to then just upload that into your iMovies, the editor, and then because I don't edit my podcasts, you just add the clip, the audio clip, and then you can add music or you can add a graphic, and then you just save it to your computer, and then you upload it to SoundCloud or the Bean Pod, whatever that thing was. And
if I understand this right, you have to upload it like to somebody who hosts it, and then from there it can go to like iTunes or whatever. Am I talking you right? There's 2 steps in there, right?
Yes, unless there's some other way to get it on iTunes that I don't know about. You have to have a host, so SoundCloud or the Bean, the Bean. What is it called? Bean Pod, and the Bean. Matt, is that right? The Bean, Podbean.
Podbean.
I just know I laughed when I heard it. So when I try to get my podcast on iTunes, you have to go and find. It's the RSS code, the link, and then you submit it to iTunes, and then like the graphic has to be 1400 by 1400 or larger for them to accept it. And then it took like 48 hours for them to say yay or nay, and I don't know why they would say no. You do not have to pay for iTunes, and then they accept it, and then all of a sudden your stuff goes on. So now all I do is upload to SoundCloud, and it goes straight to iTunes. I don't mess around with iTunes at all. So really you're just using whatever that host site that you're doing is, which I use SoundCloud. So it goes.
And whichever software that you end up using, you can always just Google or go to YouTube and just say how to whatever the specific question is. And there's tons of tutorials where they can like walk you through step by step, like exactly. I need a shirt that says the University of Google.
Rebecca, someone mentioned music. Oh my gosh. So when I first podcast, my first episode, because I love vintage, I like Frank Sinatra playing in the background, and I was like, ah. And then I recorded a whole episode, and then I thought, I'm not allowed to use Frank Sinatra music in my podcast. Like, what am I thinking? So I had to re-record it. But yeah, there's some sites where you can get some free, copyright free music to use, and then your Macs on your iMovie should have like music that you can use. But definitely make sure you're using. Yeah, Jameson actually, and I'm going to plug it. Go listen to the Godspeed podcast, because that's him and his friend Ryan's podcast. That's how I even was interested in Jameson as a person, because he had interviewed Rob Bell, and that to me that's some level of whatever you think about Rob Bell. That's that was big to me. I'm like, man, this guy Jameson interviewed Rob Bell. I want to know everything about what that was like. And so we started talking and stuff. And he had a band were his friends give them permission to use their music. So when you listen to Godspeed podcast, that really kind of eerie-ish music you hear in the beginning is a band that gave them their rights. So.
And Matt's mentioned a couple times in the chat, and I do want it, if you want to scroll back or if you're going to save the chat, I hear a couple people are going to save the chat today because it's got so many resources. Pat Flynn's tutorial on podcasting is excellent. I know I listened to that a couple years ago, and he put the link in there, and I think he's right. That's a good one, good basic one if you got some interest in that. And I want to know, Vicki does intros and outros? Or were you just joking on that?
She said that you could just make your own music, and my first thought was nobody would listen to my podcast if I made my own music. So I was like, we'll just have Vicki. That's a new job for Vicki.
That's right, with her writing music. Got it.
Jill, I will look up, or someone will look up what is Jameson's podcast name so we can find it?
It is the Godspeed podcast.
It has the word the.
That's a good question. I don't know if it's the Godspeed or Godspeed podcast. I'm butchering it. Let me see.
I know
it's just Godspeed. Where's my camera? That one. There's mine, and there's Jameson's right there. Godspeed. And then definitely, guys, you can follow us on Instagram, Writers Block Party Podcast. We're so excited about this, and a lot of you guys are our audience, and all of you really. Mm-hmm. So, we're really excited.
Why don't you explain what that is for people who just came in? What is I can't remember what we call it. Is it the Serious Writers Block Party Podcast or the Writers Block Party Podcast?
It's called the Writers Block Party Podcast, sponsored by Serious Writer. But Jameson and I host it, and basically, when we first approached it, it was going to be a lot about, writing and marketing and publishing, but Jameson and I are cut from the same cloth, and we cannot help ourselves talking about creativity and inspiration and encouragement. So that is what it has turned into with the go from Kyle and Bethany. So basically, like, one of our first episodes is talking about where do you write? And we go into what other famous authors had in their writing environment and what inspires you. And do you really need a writing environment? We talked about Jane Austen and her little table that she used. And obviously comfort wasn't a thing for her, so do you need a comfy environment to get that story out, or is that really important? So we talk about these things and in one of our first episodes, and we're so excited we're going to be interviewing people. We have a lot of cool people in our lineup to talk about what inspires them. Like Jameson said this, and we ran with it. We want to ask the questions that you can't find on Google. So we want to know the behind the scenes of what it's like to create your art and to be passionate about this whole thing about writing. And we're just so excited. So, and we do have a lot of fun. We laugh a lot. He's a trip. If you haven't ever heard Jameson talk and stuff, he's a lot of fun.
Jameson's amazing. He interviews some quite big names in here, and he's got his roots in the songwriting and writing for magazines and things like that. So it's another area of writing that we don't talk about a lot in here. Sometime we will get him in here to interview.
He was really sorry to miss it. He had work. He was really sorry to.
He does have a course on Serious Writer Academy about securing interviews, do's and don'ts, which is something that he does. And so if you're wanting to get interviews or be interviewed, that would be a great podcast to listen, or a great course to take, because he's actually doing it. Like, this is his life, and he's giving practical tips, which is really great. And so we'll try to get him in here at some point too. And we do need to spend a few minutes talking about how to be an interviewee, since we did mention that. And then let's pull everybody else in, because we said that at the beginning. I don't want to not do it. We don't have to spend too much time on it, because we did have we had a show with Anitra on here where we talked about interviews and stuff. But so Jeannie and Mom and Jill, any tips for being interviewed? How to be a good interviewee?
Preparation a little bit. I think it really helps if the hosts sends you maybe at least some possible questions. And I know that's several of the people that have interviewed me in the chat room have done that, and I think that just kind of helps. It's just, you start collecting your thoughts ahead of time. And sometimes I'll have little pieces of paper around here so I can refer to them real quick. Oh, I wanted to be sure to say this or whatever. I know that helps. I don't know. Anybody else has something else to add to that?
Well, just a couple things. I mean, I sort of have to do the same thing. I know I've been interviewed by radio and they don't send out any questions ahead of time, and you're sort of wondering, what they're going to talk about. But I prepare for that by reading, like usually it's promote a certain book, and I'll go back and read blog posts, guest posts that I've written, and some of the questions I was asked for those, figuring they're going to ask similar questions. And to make sure that you're able to give the nugget of that book in one sentence, again, that elevator pitch, you're going to use it after that book is published too, and to be able to talk about the themes. And of course, if it's an inspirational book and it's an inspirational radio program or podcast or interviewer, you're going to want to be prepared to talk about the themes in the book as far as how they relate to faith and character's growth and all those kinds of things. So preparation.
Listening to them ahead of time too, either the podcast or to listen to a couple of them, because you can kind of get the idea of their flow and what they might ask, or if they do like to laugh a lot, like what Jill says. So okay, I can relax a little on this one, or boy, I got to be a little bit straight and narrow on this one. And you get that idea, and you can do that on the radio ones too. The couple of the radio ones that have interviewed me a couple years ago, I did get questions ahead of time though, Johnny. So some radio ones you might on that. Bethany, what do you think?
Yeah, I was looking in the chat, and Catherine said get to know. I think she said the host jumped up, the platform of your host, and just piggybacking on that, I try to look up. Well, I stalk whoever's interviewing me beforehand, just so that I have. I don't know. I try not to, when I'm being interviewed, depending on the interviewer, I try not to just let it be like question, answer. I try to do a little give back so it becomes conversational. So if I know some things about the interviewer, I can connect it to something that they maybe have said at another one and kind of give them a leeway to go in to be able to ask the next question, so you don't have that minute of awkward dead air in the middle. It's something I'm working on. And then also James Rubart talked about this with Novel Marketing Podcast, I think is what it is, about talking in sound clips so that you can pull. So another thing is I'm trying to talk shorter with sound bites, I guess is the right word, with that. And that's hard to do when they ask you a big question. But there's a couple tips, I guess. And being ready and sending thank yous. I always get off and immediately send thanks so much. That was amazing. And whatever they have asked for, if they need show notes, I try to do that right away. I just want to be the best guest for them as possible. And then, with everyone, I think I get a little better. So you always feel like you're sorry for the people who started with you. You don't know anything.
I'm glad you mentioned Jim Rubart, because I've listened to that Novel Marketing Podcast or whatever a couple different times, and he talks about, as an interviewee, your job is to make that host look good.
Yeah.
I kind of sometimes think it's the other way. They should be trying to make me look good, but actually if you make them look good, they are going to love you.
And that'll come across that way too. And stuff. I know as an interviewee, sometimes I try to have a gift for the audience. Sometimes they ask for it. Sometimes they don't. So I have a short link. If they go to such and such place, they could download this thing that supplements whatever I'm doing. It's a freebie, but then I also capture email addresses at that same point in time. Not every host wants you to do that, and not every show will ask for it. But a lot of times, if you let the host know that ahead of time, a lot of times they'll ask for it and they'll let you do that. So it's kind of a little bit of both on that way. On that, we've had some questions over in the chat. I don't know if we've missed some of these. Try not to give one-word answers. That's true. It said, Rebecca's asked, what about going off on long dialogue? You mean to get the interviewer talking? How do you get that? I don't know.
I guess, I think so. I mean, okay, so Matt's in here, for example. Matt is an excellent interviewer.
Yes.
He is so good at making it be very conversational, and so it becomes more of a back and forth. Some interviews, it'll be very much tell us about your book. When did you write the book? Right? And it's like, okay, well, now you're really talking more about me. But in my mind, I'm thinking, how can I connect that to the audience? Because they don't care about like the why unless I can make it pertain to them. So, but with Matt or someone who like that, who is engaging, if I can find a way to throw the conversation back so it becomes like a ping pong match between us going back and forth, I think that is a more interesting interview as a listener to listen to than like just a question answer kind of thing. And even in writers chat, when we have guests, sometimes it'll start going more interview, like question answer, and no one's talking and there's not a discussion. And it's like, how can we make everybody start talking here? And then I don't know, I think it's good to throw it back to the interviewer, and people may disagree with me on that, but I try to get them talking too, because it's their audience and they're there to really to listen to the person. You're just there because they like that person so much, they're going to listen to the guests that they bring on. Unless they're
it is about the listener. It is not necessarily about the interviewer or the interviewee. It's about the listener, really, which is back to it's always about the reader when it comes to our writing too. Yeah.
I like to ask about the audience too. That's something they may not tell you who their audience is. Like if it's for radio, that's a very big audience. But I try to figure out who exactly is listening to your show so that I know how then to market the book as I'm talking. So if it's mostly parents of teens, that's a whole different conversation than if it's not necessarily directed to parents at all. And it's more a women's thing. Then I'm talking more about the confidence aspect of stuff, not necessarily let's make sure your teen daughters aren't, chasing after the boys kinds of things. And so that helps you know how to direct what you're saying as well.
Yeah. Jill, did you have anything to add when we talked about this conversation about interviewer or interviewee?
I think you guys said a lot. I think being prepared is really important, especially if you have a squirrel personality. And I know for me, I mean, I've never been interviewed for a podcast, but I've been interviewed when Blab was a thing and Periscope was really hopping. I was interviewed a lot for what I was doing on Periscope. And I would get thrown these questions, which was even harder because you were on screen and I always make facial expressions. I can't help it. But be ready for anything. I mean, after the first few that I did, and I got some really weird questions and I definitely reacted that way. Like, be prepared for anything. Really think about what's the worst kind of crazy question that they could ask me and think about your answer, depending on what it's about, Yeah. Some people ask really intimate questions and you either need to know how to, in a classy way, decline answering that and maybe practice saying that, or you need to have your answer ready.
A long time ago, in one of my previous, when I worked for the health department, our local radio station, we would go in once a month and get interviewed. So I knew the lady that would interview us, and we're sitting there and she was asking us what's new at the health department, and I'm giving the little update, and she looks over and says real quietly, so it didn't go across the air, I'm going to leave for a few minutes, just keep talking. Like I had to keep talking like she was there, and she left the room and didn't come back. That was so bizarre. So I finally said, and Mary, my last point is, and she come running back. It was hysterical. I've never had anything like that happen before, so that was crazy. We got just a few minutes left. Do we want to invite people? Come on back in. If you can't get your video back on, say it in the chat, because we may have taken you up, but come on back in if you can, and we'll see what questions we have.
I want to say too, Catherine had a good point about the live streaming aspect of it, and I think that's another I always try to make them have as little editing to do as possible, even if they're recording it, because they'll tell you like if it's live or not. They usually, unless you ask, but they've always told me. But even if they're recording it, I try to do it in one take. If I can't, they don't have to go back and do work on mine. I just feel like the easier I can be as a guest for them, the more likely that they'll refer me or have me come back. So
yeah. Anybody having trouble coming back on that want to come back on? Who can't get in? Robin? Okay, I'll help you, Robin. Go ahead. Keep talking. Anybody want to add something or ask a question? I gotta find Robin.
I hope what I said was helpful. I felt very, I felt bad that James couldn't be in here because he would have probably given really great stuff, and I just felt like I was inadequate to talk about it. So I hope you guys got some good stuff.
Melissa.
This is Sherry Lynn. What I was thinking was because I interview a lot of people, I love interviewing people, and I love trying to ask them questions that nobody else would ask them. But I also send questions ahead of time, and I ask them, what don't you want me to talk about? Because there's certain, when you interview somebody or you're the interviewee, there are topics that are off limits, and you got to remain professional. That's the way I look at it. But we still have fun. I've interviewed a few people that are on here, and it was fun. We had a good time. Jillian's laughing. Why are you laughing?
Because Bethany said, "Where's Matt?" And I was pointing to Matt in my screen.
There he is.
Yeah, he just popped in.
I didn't see him.
Sorry, I had a computer issue and had to restart. So
I would like to say that don't make it complicated. I mean,
Right.
it can be really, really complicated if you want, but don't make it complicated. There will always be a reason not to do something, but if you want to do it, just do it.
Rebecca had a good point in the chat about practice by watching politicians evade each other's questions. You might learn on that. But when I was in public health, they taught us how to respond like in emergency situations and how to think through the words and what to say and how to speak in those sound bites. And so you can watch some of the people on television, whether they're politicians or just celebrities being interviewed, and often learn little tricks that could turn around and help us as interviewees to come across. Just do it, like Nike.
Yeah, I want to say that too, just do it big, because I think there's ways, like Jill talked about, just using her phone. There are ways to start out so simple and easy. And it's like, okay, you do it that way, you find out whether you've got the gift for it, the drive for it, you want to keep doing it. And then you can grow in your methods and your equipment and all that kind of thing as you get into it. But I think it's great just to start out simple and do your best and see what happens.
Tina asked about how do you find your guests? And I don't know, Jill, if you want to talk about finding guests, or Bethany, maybe?
My guests have always been presented to me as a list when I've been interviewing faculty, so I haven't had to find people. So I'm not the best person to ask that question. Answer it. I'll pass that one to Jill, but I do have something I want to bring up after.
Basically, for myself, because I'm going to be interviewing people for Sheila's Vintage, I just think about the kind of content. Like I was going to say this, I didn't launch 3 to 7 episodes right away. I just did one at a time, but my personality is just a little different. I'm not very organized, and that would have, if I had to do that, it probably would have made it not fun for me. And so I'm really good at like, okay, I need to get this done the night before it's going to launch. I'm going to get it done. And I just, kind of freely talk, whatever. But I always plan my episodes like 5 in advance. So right now I know what the next 5 are going to be. And then when I get like 2 in, I'll do the next 5. But really, I just think about what kind of content do I want out there and who would be a really great person to interview talking about this subject. And then I'll just go ask them. And people love to be interviewed. So they usually just say yes, like
they
absolutely.
do. They do, don't they?
Yes,
don't
they do.
What I've done is I've asked people. I mean, I've had some pretty big names on my show. I don't like to call it my show. It's not my show. It's helping the authors. But I ask people, and I've asked people around me, who do you want me to interview? And that will bring other people in, and I get a lot of response. Who do you want me to interview? Or who do you think I should interview on this topic? And I have, and that brings more people in too. They're going to interview somebody that I asked her to interview. So it's kind of cool.
I had a really great tip when I first started podcasting, and that was like someone said, if you're not comfortable interviewing or you're not really sure yet, start with some friends, like maybe they're friends who've done something kind of interesting. But like for me, my first 2 guests were, like, I'm a minister in the Presbyterian Church. I interviewed 2 other ministers in the Presbyterian Church in Canada, who I've known for a really long time, who I know, like they haven't written anything. They haven't really, like, my podcasts on spirituality, but one is a camp director. So I thought, hey, like, it'd be cool to talk to her about spirituality and kids and families. And I think people want to hear that. And she'd listened to podcasts before. So she knew what was going on. But that was really helpful because those first 2 episodes that I did, the first 2 interviews, I was really nervous. And then trying to figure out, try to get myself be comfortable. That was way easier talking to 2 people that I've had lots of conversations with before.
Does anybody have any ideas about how to interview people who are not tech savvy? Because I have a couple people that I'm wanting to interview, and one I'm just doing it on an iPad. But so many people have so much knowledge, but they're scared of phones. How do you do that?
You got 2 choices. You can do it in person and record it, and then edit it into your podcast, or you can do it on something simple like Skype. You can record from Skype.
They're scared of that.
You might be able to. I think that there is a plugin or an app you can use to record phone conversations and just record it on your phone.
I've done that too. It's not the best quality, but it's something. Yeah.
But in person would be great.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Matt or Sherilyn, when you guys, in the interviews that you've done, have you had somebody not be techie? And how have you helped them?
I actually told them the only way we could do it was through Zoom, and that all they needed to do was click on the link. And if they didn't see me, to move the mouse, I put this in the email, move the mouse in the lower left corner, there'll be a mic and a video, click on it. Had no problem since.
Yeah,
but,
every guest I've interviewed, it's been on Zoom, except that I did have one in person. Well, I've had 2 in person. One was just because they're in Winnipeg, and it was, they're in my hometown. It was nice to go and see them, but they would have been fine on the tech. The other one would have had no clue whatsoever what she was doing. So I just, I think it's sort of a decision of how important is the interview to you. So if it's someone at a distance and they're not comfortable with the technology, I think for me, I would probably just move on. I've got a really long list, and I just keep a note in Evernote of possible guests. And I think I have there's probably 80 names on that right now.
So you're covered.
But it's contacting and researching, are they really going to be a good guest? Are they going to be a good fit? And I've got combinations of kind of people I know, and then sort of bigger names or authors or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Keeping a list is good. And like Jillian said, staying ahead. I do a couple of vlogs, and we try to stay ahead by a month.
Yeah. On that.
And you have 80 on your list, Matt. You're all set for a while. You're so set.
No, I have 80 people that I think I could contact to be a guest, but I was behind actually. I think I have 2 interviews this week and 3 next week, so I'll get back ahead. But I was on a week to week for the last couple, so that's been a bit challenging.
That is great. Well, this has been a great conversation today. Bethany, do you want to wrap up with Jill and thank her, and then we'll turn to Johnny to tell us about what next week's about.
So can I share one final tip for audio? So if you're where I'm going to be starting with the podcast is using Zoom to do the video and audio, but using it for my blog. So when Jill said, what are you going to do? Because you have to have your content ready, because I'm so inconsistent with the blogging. But that's what I'm going to do. And Brendan Burchard, who we haven't talked about in a while, he does this on his blogs. And just I've talked about this before, once a week you have your blog topic, but he does a YouTube video and pulls the audio, which you can do on Zoom. So if you just do a little 3 to 5 minute talking about whatever you're going to write about, that gives you an extra part of content. And it's a way probably to start practicing for your podcast, and then even creating a backlist of stuff too. So that's where I'm going to start before I start interviewing people. So that might, if that helps you feel better about not talking to people or figuring it out on your own, you can join me on this journey. But I do want to go ahead and close and just say thanks to Jill and Jameson. We miss you today. And be sure to check out the Writer's Block Party podcast. She didn't tease as much as I thought she was going to about that, so I'll give her a chance to do that. But they've got some pretty cool stuff coming with this first episode in particular. So Jill, thanks for sharing today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Johnny, do you want to tell them about next week while we're still recording?
Sure. Just really quick though, Tina had a question about prioritizing podcasts over blogging. Can you give a quick yes, no? Bethany, Jill?
I was going to say that what I have gone into full-time blogging. So what I decided to do was do Mondays a podcast and then post 2 times on my blog, so that you were doing a mixture of both. And I always post my podcast to my blog. I think that's really important, because some people are like, you have a blog? Or if they know about my podcast, they're like, you have a blog? Or they know about my blog, you have a podcast? So like making sure that they're always, they're, I don't know, holding hands, whatever.
Mine are going to intertwine like that too. My blog and my podcast are going to be the same. So it'll be, that blog doesn't go up hopefully until that podcast audio link is there at the same time. So it's a real dense one post a week. But
I wouldn't say, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a podcaster, I would say go with the podcasting and do blogging on the side. If you're trying to do both and you're just trying to get it all out there, do both. That's what I'm doing. I think that's what, Bethany wants to do. Or if you want to be a blogger and have like a little side podcast here and there, go for it. I mean, it's really whatever you want to do and what works best for your brand, but make sure that you're on Instagram.
She's always going to put that Instagram plug in there. And now I'm going to put a plug in for Diana Flagel, who is a literary agent with Heartline Literary Agency. She is going to be our guest next week. The main topic is going to be writing convincing nonfiction. However, I've also asked her to give us just her insights as an agent on, we're always interested in trends, always interested in the market. Don't want to be killed by that cat.
I like the kitty.
Yeah. So anyway, Diana Flagel will be here next week and be our.
Yay! I love her.
Yeah, she's a great person.
She's a sweetheart. She is a sweetheart. And like Bethany said in the chat, this has been an amazing discussion today. So thank you, Jill, very, very much. And thank you for all you guys for joining in the conversation. And feel free that when we get this posted later, if you want to post, say, Matt, if you want to post again your link to your podcast and stuff like that, because several people will want to check each other out. And for the ones that are coming up for Jill and all those, we'll post them on the group so we could share that. And we thank you for either being here live today or watching the replay. And I'm going to quit the recording and hopefully not take everybody off the air, but I am going to take myself off. Well, I'm going to quit the recording. See you guys next week.